What's poppin', everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Zach Lesage here. Today we're going to be going over the metagame at EUIC and cover over some of the top deck lists that were featured in that event. I'm going to put the link to the Limitless page in the description so you can check out all of these lists. And if you need any of the cards for these decks, you can always check out our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards and at PTCGO Store. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to turn my camera off, not because I don't want y'all to see this beautiful Pokemon hat wearing person. I just think that it's better to see the deck lists in all full glory. So I think that takes off everything there. And hopefully y'all can still hear me. If you can, give this video a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. So you can see we see a lot of different decks. And we actually had Cloth win the whole thing. Dragapult was probably the most expected deck between that and Miraidon, which didn't really go as far as we expected it to, especially with some top players like Azul playing it. So those decks didn't necessarily pop off as hard, but Dragapult did very well. Gholdengo was basically one of the more secretive decks of the tournament. I think it caught wind a few players on like the Wednesday of the event, kind of like started asking for cards. A lot of people started putting it together that had some good matchup spreads. And of course, there's also Archeoladon or Archeoladon or the Bridge deck. That's the deck that I actually ended up playing. A lot of people played that after its second place finish at Puerto Rico special events. So we're gonna kind of go over this starting off at the top 16. And if there's archetypes, maybe there's two players that play the same deck, we'll figure it out from there. So we're going to start off with Snorlax Stall. Leon played this to a top 16 finish. And they went with more of a Rotom build, which is kind of cool. I do like Rotom builds. Wow, the ads are going crazy on Limitless right now. Shout out that team. They get in that bag. It's one of those things where Snorlax is always going to be about block, but I do like having the Cornerstone, Ogerpon, and the Mimikyu. The Rotom, maybe I'm thinking about like how the metagame approaches it. Maybe it doesn't necessarily matter too much if they're knocking out a Rotom, if you're able to block your opponent with block in those matchups. Nothing otherwise too crazy here. More of just a really basic build with Hero's Cape that seemed quite well positioned. I think if there's a deck like Snorlax going forward, if you're preparing for Vancouver, Fortaleza, League Cups, League Challenges, Local League, a deck like Snorlax does seem quite strong for the remainder of our post-rotation format, because if people didn't put the effort in to prepare against the deck now, they probably aren't going to put the effort in to prepare against the deck going forward. So we see number 15, Simone. And I hope that I'm pronouncing everyone's name correctly. We see a take on the Cloth Terapagos deck that ended up winning. They do have a copy of Ditto in their deck, which is kind of cool. The sudden transformation, allowing it to copy Pokemon like Badoo out of the discard pile, but having more HP. So you could still slap on a Binding Mochi. And it ends up working. Pricing stuff might be a little bit of an issue, but we can deal with that ourselves. I think that there's quite a few builds that with the Munkidori, Dark Energy, doing cool things in these matchups. Munkidori ended up being quite a strong Pokemon at EUIC, even more so than Gardevoir decks. I think that we're going to see Cloth pop off. I think a lot of players are just going to want to play this deck because it won EUIC. It is quite a bit of a hard deck to put together because there's a lot of like really like a bunch of one-ofs. Like not every single person has a copy of this Ditto available to them. This is a promo only card. So it only came out as a promo. If no one has any of these from Shrouded Fable blisters, they might not have them around. This is a card that's on the brink of rotation. So with all the one-ofs, it's a little bit harder to put together if you live near a pretty great store, or if you want to order the cards from like Kayfabe, you probably can put it together pretty easily, but it's easier for some than others. I think that this is a strategy that's going to be strong until the end of post-rotation. We're at 14. I'm trying not to skip anyone. So we see Dragapult here. Now, Dragapult's a fantastic player, by the way, and they went with no Dusknor. This is a version that we saw a few top players like Tord Reckliffe play, Vinny Fernandez play, and they went with a Blood Moon Ursaluna and going with other cards like Munkidori. So just cutting out a lot of extra fat from the deck and going with just a pure version, really going for that Phantom Dive strategy. You're not giving up extra prize cards, just going Dragapult, 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 allowing you to have Crispins, lands. I think that this is a very interesting take on the list, and it might be just the natural next step of a Dragapult list. So it's really something to consider when you put it all together. I think a deck like this could be absolutely fantastic. And I think when I'm saying it could be absolutely fantastic, we have a few proven success stories from the tournament. So I really think that these are the lists to study because there is an opportunity here to make this deck better than what it previously was. We're going to move on to number 13, Jelly Van Kampen, typically the Gholdengo player. And they played more of a traditional list with the Palkia V-Star. Palkia V-Star using its Star Portal to accelerate energies onto Radiant Greninja, or to make it a backup attacker. That could be pretty cool. A lot of the list playing the Monkey Dory to move damage counters from your Pokemon. I mean, with Dragapult being one of the most played decks, that's great. Dango just ended up having a decent matchup spread against the field because it's good against some of these aggro decks like Miraidon, because it's harder for them to knock out a Dango after they take their first 2 prize cards with Amp on a Gimme Ghoul. Gholdengo can then knock out things like Dragapults, and it also does well against Archeoladon, where it can hold its own against Gardevoir to some degree. Not always a perfect matchup spread, but it's one of those things where Dango did do quite well with a lot of top players playing it at EUIC. So we are then going to see another Cloth Terapagos deck. We can see that this Cloth Terapagos, running no darkness energies, they decide to run a Genesect. So just some differences of techs here. We're starting to see some of these black belts training, so it's looking a little bit more of a traditional build than what we see with some of these newer builds. But if you're building any deck like this Cloth Terapagos, cards like Ditto and the Genesect are cards that you want to have at the back of your deck box so that you're able to kind of interchange them as you playtest with your friends to see which build works out best for you. We're going to be moving on to Grant Manley, a very familiar name up there, playing Lost Zone Box. Now, Lost Zone Box did quite well across the board because Lost Zone Box, Pikachu EX is enough to knock out a Miraidon EX. They can't knock it out with Resolute Hearts because of the abilities. So since they can't get a one-shot, they're always forced to go Amp on something else or go Boss's Orders around. Same thing with Archeoladon. The bridge can't OHKO this because of Resolute Heart. So there's some decks, unlike Dragapult, that have ways around it. This could just auto-win some matchups. Pairing it with a few other cards like Gigas that can allow you to maybe knock out a Dragapult. The pesky little Sableye that can spread damage counters and Cramorant. There's enough Pokemon in this deck to just make it work all together. I think Grant's list is very strong when we think about it. Like, there's a lot of really nice tech cards that are thoughtful. I think this deck has a glaring weakness to Dragapult, the #1 top played deck in format. So unless the Gigas is enough to get past through that matchup, I don't think that this deck is going to see as much success as it did, but I do imagine it's going to see some pockets of success going forward. Grant in his tweet did say that it was he felt like he had the best deck in the room. I don't blame him. I think that if you avoid some matchups, this is a fantastic deck, and his success certainly shows with it. We see Reggie here with Dragapult Dusknor. Now, playing our most traditional version of Dragapult Dusknor yet, because this one is not the Blood Moon Lack of Dusknor version. I think most lists ended up looking like this in the tournament. Some went triple lands, some may have added a Crispin, but majority of these lists looked very, very, very similar when it just came to how they were builds and their approach to it. I think that most lists are going to look like this. I actually wouldn't be surprised. I think most lists are going to look like Natalie Millar's from the second place. That's probably just going to pop off a lot there. But I do like the second Badoo here when it comes out to best of 3, and a top 16 finish here is absolutely fantastic. We see Oscar Madsen playing the Dragapult Charizard deck. So a lot of Dragapults here. But they're going with the Charizard build. No Charmeleon. The Charizard allows you to have an answer against any of those Miraidon decks, anything that you want to scale damage against. So it does really help you get to those right numbers. I think this build looks absolutely fantastic when it comes to how its approach to the metagame is. And I think if you're looking for a great, well-rounded deck that isn't just Dragapult Dusknor or Dragapult and Friends, like the Blood Moon build, this is another good opportunity to add to that. And I think that Dragapult Dusknor or Dragapult Charizard or Dragapult and Friends are just all fantastic decks. Oscar is a fantastic deck builder, and I don't see anything different than from here. So it's just fantastic. That brings us to our top 8. We see James Cox. James Cox played the same list as quite a few other players. We see Aiden's, Brent Tonnison's, James Cox. We go through the list of players who played it. Pretty traditional build here of Dragapult Dusknor. I think it just seems quite strong. He played it, went in with it. Nothing really that I'd change. These are the lists that we saw from Merida where it made top 8. So I really like that there. We have Roan Nelson playing another Snorlax list, another Rotom-based Snorlax list, but they went for the tech of adding in Mawile. So you might be like, why would you play Tempting Trap if they can't retreat? Well, sometimes if your opponent can get out of block, like with a Canceling Clone, Mawile can stop them from getting there as well. So it can be interesting. We do see that they had a copy of Milotic, so they can't put Pokemon and cards into your opponent's hands in case they have any way to bounce back. They do have a Cornerstone and they do have a Diancie. So just some different techs here across the board. The Diancie is going to be probably going to be for a Lugia-based matchup. And they went with Enriching Energy. Just a different build on the deck. I think it's interesting. We're going to see Daniel Magda playing yet another version of Snorlax. Snorlax, this one going with Rotom, going with a Cornerstone, but nothing really else. A secret box build. Not entirely sure how I feel about all the builds of Snorlax. Like, I think Snorlax used to be really refined, and now we have so many different ways. I think this Pokemon is inherently strong. It usually sees success, so if you're looking to make a deep run in a tournament, Snorlax could just be that Pokemon. Moving on, we're going to see Vinny Fernandez, one of the best players in the game, playing a straight-up Dragapult version. You can see this is very similar to what we previously saw on the list. Their build's a little bit more teched out. I think I really like how this list looks like on paper, but since we're not going with all these extra cards for Dusknor, we just have a lot of extra opportunities to load up our Pokemon with techs or load up our field with techs. So I think builds like this might get experimented with before Vancouver and Fortaleza. And we're going to see Archeoladon. Archeoladon really coming out of nowhere. We see it's a Dialga build of the deck. I think it's a really cool Dialga build of the deck. There's also just the straight up version of the deck, and that's the deck that I ended up playing at the tournament myself. Just loading up energies with Assemble Alloy. I could see a deck like this continue to see success. It was one of the top 3 most played decks, I believe, at the tournament, and I don't see a reason why it's going to be played less of, because it does pretty well against the field in general. Just straight up attacking, and that's all you really need. So I thought really cool gameplay across the board, could be quite strong. It's really just loading up Pokemon with energies. We're gonna see another Dango build here, and this one is Xander Perot's. No Palkia. Going with more of the Monkey Dory. I think that part's pretty cool when it comes down to it. It's pretty straight up build. You can see that there's a very strong list of players that played this deck at the tournaments. So looking at across the board, a lot of players ended up cashing out with this deck. I think we're going to see a lot of the Dango builds just look like this going forward. Then we see Natalie Millar's version. She played with Ethan Heggie, one of the TPCI casters. To me, this seems like a really strong build deck as well. I mean, we're really not changing too much. I like the triple lance in here. I like some of the inclusions in here. I would have maybe liked a Lost Vacuum over a Temple of Sinnoh. That's just me, but I think it's one of those things where mostly people are probably going to be playing this list. And then it gets to our champions list at the end. Ryuki playing the Terapagos Cloth deck. And we can see that there's Terapagos Cloth, there's things like the Monkey Dory, the Kieran, a lot of really interesting cards added to this deck in general. And I think that this is just an awesome build of the deck. And I think we're probably going to see a lot of people playing it. I know we've covered over Cloth a few other times. There were a lot of other decks too. If we look in their statistics, like Gardevoir wasn't a deck that we covered. There was plenty of players playing Gardevoir, Miraidon, Lugia. So this is where you can kind of look over there, look through all the different deck lists. But I think a lot of the decks, like Gardevoir, has to go down in play because Gardevoir did not see as much success, didn't live up to the hype. Same thing with Miraidon. Lugia might actually go up because Miraidon goes down. Lugia naturally goes up. That might keep Snorlax kind of at a standstill of if it's going to see a lot of play or not. Charizard looks like it's just not going to die in this format. I think with a lot of the way that the format turned out, it could be just generally okay. Same thing with Gouging Fire. Raging Bolt continues to fall off. Regidrago is pretty interesting. Palkia doesn't necessarily have a great place in the format, and a lot of these decks towards the bottom are just more or less decks that exist in the top 20 or so. Our format's really kind of rounded out a lot of decks, and there's just some decks that aren't good enough to make it in this current metagame, or the metagame was too toxic for it. So again, everything's going to be put into the link. I'm going to see if I could put all my stuff back here. There we are. Yo. And we're going to continue to cover. Tomorrow we have our top 10 best decks going up there. Those are going to be my personal top 10. So I'm really excited to kind of look at the metagame objectively after we've had EUIC, and then just kind of piece them together, be like, yeah, I really like this list. I really like this list because I'm a player myself, right? I'm not just some other Pokemon YouTuber. I mean, you might be watching me. I'm a Pokemon YouTuber, but I do play at these tournaments. You might be like, oh, he's scrolling down the list pretty far, but I did end up coming 139th, and there was 3,400 players at this tournament. So I do know what I'm doing. I do make some pretty cool calls when it comes down to it, and I hope that y'all are watching my content more than just a personality sometimes. Maybe it's better. I don't know which one I want, but that's the list that I ended up playing, in case anyone was curious. And if you're trying to improve your game so that your name gets on these Limitless pages, hit me up for some coaching at metafy.gg/@ZachLassage. Totally would love to help you out with all that. But until then, I will catch up with all y'all later. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out and have a great one. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.